Welcome to another edition of Journey of Hope. Stories of people that are sharing their journey. Stories of the bumps and the detours and the surprises along the way. The psalmist says, "Today is the day of the Lord. Let us be glad and rejoice in it." Our guests today are Bobby and Rebecca from North Carolina. And they're going to share their journey that brought them here to Loma Linda. Bobby and Rebecca, it's good to have you here. And we've got people from really around the world that are watching this. And we want to learn a little bit about your background before we hear about your experience. Rebecca, where are you from?
I was from Wallace, North Carolina before we were married.
Wallace, were you born and raised there in North Carolina? So you've been in North Carolina all along?
All my life.
All your life. All right. And where are you from?
I was born in Mount Olive, North Carolina, and I've been there all my life.
So we got two North Carolinas from birth and all the way through.
All the way through.
So now tell us a little bit about where'd you guys meet?
At church.
Met in church. Now that's kind of a story. I met in church, okay? What were you doing? Why you met in church?
Well, I'm a gospel singer.
Okay.
Kind of a sideline that I've been doing for almost 50 years now.
So kind of a hobby and
yeah.
avocation, really.
That's right.
Okay, so you're a gospel singer. So are you telling me that you went to her church?
That's right. Her dad was pastor of a church, and our group was invited there to sing. And we went to visit them numerous times over the years.
I want to know, because if I remember correctly, how old was she and how old were you when you first met?
Probably the first time I saw her, she was about 12 years old.
She's about 12.
Yeah, I was probably 15, 16, something like that.
And this is when you were singing?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
So this was part of your avocation. I mean, you started very early. Were you part of a music group then, or?
Yeah, we were.
Okay.
My brother and I and two cousins formed a singing group. They were 12 and I was 13. I was the old man in the group. And two of us are still living and still singing together. So
really?
This year we'll make 50 years.
Is that a fact? 50 years of singing together. So your dad was a pastor. So did he move through Carolina, or was he stayed there in one church?
Mostly right in the same area.
As a pastor, okay. So then where did you go to school?
I went to Penderley High School.
Okay. And then when you graduated, where'd you go from there?
I got married.
You got married. Okay.
School of Hard Knocks.
All right, got married. And apparently you met her when you were singing, and apparently one thing led to another. You began dating, and you got married right after high school.
Yeah, well,
I was 17.
You were 17.
At the time, and I finished my senior year.
All right.
Married.
Married, okay.
Yeah.
And what were you doing at this time?
well, I finished high school and I went to Wayne Community College, majored in accounting. And I worked part-time at a milling company. Became I said their chief cook and bottle washer because I wore a lot of hats, but I handled all the accounting and stuff for the company, even while I was in school. And I worked part-time while I was in school, and then after school, I worked full-time there for about 13 years. And it was during that time that we got married.
You got married during this period of time. Mm-hmm. So what were your plans? I mean, what were you going to do?
Well, I often thought about having my own practice in accounting, and I actually did start a part-time practice, something I did on the side, did tax returns.
While you had your regular job?
While I had my regular job. Did tax returns and some bookkeeping, accounting stuff for small companies in the area. And after about 13 years, we decided that it was time to make the move, and so we went full-time.
Well, you told me an interesting story that kind of gave me an insight. You had both of you were working, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And then you decided to branch out on your own.
Right.
And start your own business by faith.
Yeah.
Okay. And so were you going to work and support him in this, or was this about the same time that you quit?
No, she quit.
No, I quit my job also.
You quit your job also, and you quit your regular job.
Same day.
The same day. And but you were telling me something that gave me an idea about your stewardship. You had a couple of vehicles, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
What were they?
We had 2 new cars.
Two new cars.
We'd had them probably a year maybe or less. And once we made the decision to go out on our own, we just sold both of them. And
Because?
took the hit. Well, we wanted to be able to stick it out because we didn't know how long it would be before we would be able to match the income that we had. And so we just got rid of them.
So you realized that you didn't really have a steady income coming in.
Right.
And so to avoid these car payments, you got rid of the cars. Good move. So, I mean, a year later, what's happening?
Well, actually, by the end, we quit our jobs in May, and by the end of the year, we had matched the income we had the prior year. So everything
With both of you working?
Yeah, and so everything worked out really good.
So it was a good move.
Yeah.
Now, did you have a family at this time?
No. Well, yeah, at that time we did, yeah.
You had a family, the beginning of your family. And you have how many children now?
2.
Yeah, we have 2 children.
2 children. And grandchildren?
5.
You had 5 grandchildren. They're all there in the South? And
All there
Right in the
fairly
same
close to
neighborhood.
us.
Okay. So everything's going along reasonably well. And what did you end up doing as a job then? Did you come back in and help with the
I
business?
was helping with the accounting.
Helping out with accounting, okay? And everything's going along reasonably well. And do you have any cancer in the family?
My mother had breast cancer.
She had breast cancer, and was she treated for it
Yes,
successfully?
and she was a survivor.
Okay. And do you have any cancer in your family?
Yes, I had some on both sides. None of my immediate family, but aunts, cousins.
But everything's going along reasonably well until some time ago, and then what happened?
Well, just about a year ago, I noticed having to get up a time or two at night, use the bathroom, and a couple of little problems. My blood pressure elevated a little bit, which was out of the ordinary. My blood pressure was always super good. And so it was busy, we're accountants, so it was tax season's on and things are wide open, but I called my doctor, I said, I think I need to come in and see you. And so I went in, and we did an exam and decided to do blood work. And a few days later, he lets me know that my PSA was 7.6. And, but we said it could have been a fluke, so let's check it again. So he said 2 months. It was busy. It wound up being 4 months. I go back in and we do blood work again. And it's gone up to 7.65, which wasn't much of an increase, but nonetheless, it was still there, yeah. And so then we decided to have a biopsy. And sends me to a urologist and did the biopsy. And unfortunately, my urologist went on vacation. And so they made me wait like 2 weeks before they...
Before you got the news?
Got the news, yeah. And during the time once I found out the PSA was high, I took some time, went on the internet, studied PSA a little bit, did a lot of reading, and I don't know, just to educate myself to find out potentially what was going on. Yeah, yeah. And I had a good friend who had prostate cancer, and we graduated from high school together, and he was a client of mine. And he had robotic surgery and seemed to be quite successful, so that's pretty much what I had determined I was going to do.
If you, oh no.
If it came back positive. But the main thing I did was just learn all I could about prostate cancer during those months that passed by. And which made me feel a little bit better. At least there were options out there.
Knowledge is very,
yeah, it was very powerful. Yeah. And in the beginning, I was quite distraught, but I prayed about it and did my research, and finally decided, well, you know, I'm going to have this surgery.
If you have it.
Yeah, if I have it. And by the time the verdict came in, I was pretty much sure that it was positive, but I also had learned enough to know that if they told me it was negative from the biopsy, I knew they hadn't done a free PSA test. So I was going to ask him to run another blood test and do the free PSA, just to be sure.
Yeah.
And of course, that didn't happen. It came back that it was cancer. And honestly, by that time, I'd often wondered how I would react when the news was given to me that I had cancer. And honestly, that morning, I had to go by myself. Rebecca's brother was in intensive care.
So she was with him.
She was with him. And we were kind of sure that everything was going to be fine, you know. But anyway, I went by myself. And when he told me, I don't think I would have reacted any differently if he had told me I was getting gray hair, because I was pretty much sure that was going to be the diagnosis based on what I had read and all
So
the
it wasn't
studying.
devastating because you've been doing some reading.
Yeah, I wasn't.
Knew that it wasn't a
totally
death
right.
sentence.
Right. Unfortunately, Rebecca I hadn't shared my knowledge with her. And when I called her at the hospital to tell her that.
So you told her over the phone?
Yeah. Well, I was going to call her. She told me to call. As soon as you get out, you call me. Well, I took a little too long to call, and I was in the parking lot when she calls me. And of course, she wants to know, and so I told her. And she was kind of devastated by it.
Tell me, Rebecca, when you call him, because you can't wait because he hasn't called you, what's really going on? What did you find out? So when he tells you, how did it impact you?
The more I thought about it, the worse it was for me. And eventually, I just couldn't stay at the hospital anymore. I just broke down
You were with your
had
brother?
to go home.
You had to go home. How far away are we talking about?
Well, we have a
About
mobile,
30 minutes.
Yeah, we have a mobile home at the beach, and we were staying there.
Staying at the beach?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so she told me she was going to the beach, back to the place there. And I had plans. I was supposed to play some music that night. And she told me to go ahead and stay, that she would be all right.
But you could
But I didn't. I called them and told them I wasn't going to show up. And I drove as quickly as I could, which took me about an hour to get there, because I wanted to share what I had learned with her. And so once we were able to talk, we talked a right good while that night about it, and kind of reassured her that it wasn't necessarily a death sentence.
And that began to help.
Yes.
Began to help. So at this point, in the back of your mind, you're planning on doing surgery.
That's right.
But some things happen.
Well, 2 years prior to that, I had been asked to go by myself to a local church and sing for their revival, just do a couple of songs. I went that night, and one of their deacons announced to the congregation, he knew some of them didn't know it, but he had prostate cancer. And he had prayed about it a lot, and he felt that God had led him to proton therapy. And so he explained a little about it. He talked about Loma, and told what he had learned.
You didn't know anything about Loma.
I didn't know anything about Loma at that point. I probably had heard the name, but I didn't know much about it. And so that was my first exposure. So that had been 2 years.
Prior,
Yeah.
okay.
And some of the guys in the group later on, when everything came down like it did, said, well, you were meant to be there that night. You know, you were meant to hear that. And so I still was pretty convinced that I was going to do the surgery. So much so that my friend had done a lot of research and picked a good surgeon. I mean, he just didn't.
He recommended.
Yeah, and he recommended the surgeon and told me what all he went through to locate this surgeon. So I had an appointment with him. And I had another client who had gone down to Florida to the Proton Center down there and was actually in treatment. And he got a relative of his to call my office and tell me to call him and at a certain time, and that he wanted to talk with me. So I had an appointment at that time, so I wasn't going to be free, but I couldn't get back up with him. And so I told my sister, if they show up, my sister works with me, I said, if they show up, just you call him and explain what's going on. But guess what? My client didn't show up. They were no-show. They came later, but they just didn't show up. So I had time, so I called him, and I talked with him, talked with his wife, and then he puts me on the phone with one of the reps from down there, and they talked to me a little bit, and then they send me a packet of stuff. They FedExed it. Came in the next day. I didn't even open it. And by that time, I thought I had made my decision.
You weren't confused.
Right. I had talked to another client who had had the same type surgery, different surgeon. He could be a poster child for it. I mean, he came out really great. And had I only talked to those two guys, I probably would have already had not proton, but I would have had surgery.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would have done it right away. And, but I didn't do that. I called some other folks. I found out I knew more people that had had prostate cancer than I thought I did. And so I just kept calling and talking to guys. And the more I talked to, the less the results weren't too good.
The real story began
Real
coming
story,
out.
yeah. Mm-hmm. And I had one client 10 years before had come in the office, and he was quite concerned. He was just fixing to retire at a young age, actually 58, I think he was. And but he had prostate cancer. He was really concerned about erectile dysfunction, and so he'd done a lot of research, and he was going to have surgery, and it was done laparoscopically. I'm assuming it's pretty much like the robotic surgery today, and it was a nerve sparing, and so he went and had it done. I asked him numerous times over the 10-year period how he was doing, and he was doing great. So that was the story I got from him until that day I called him and I said, well, I've been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I know you had surgery, and I want to know how you came out. And so at that point, then he came clean, and he told me the down and dirty, so to speak, and that he had been impotent for 10 years, and what he had feared the most was exactly how he came out. And so that let me know that surgery was not a magic cure.
Right.
And,
Works for some. But
works for some, and everybody has to make their own decision. You have to decide what you want to do. But what it did do, it caused me to go open that packet of stuff. And in that packet was Bob Markini's book. And I read it from cover to cover. And then I went back on the internet, and then I called more people and more guys, and every guy I called knew several more. So I really got a good cross-section. And it wasn't really good as far as I was concerned, because a lot of the guys were having to live with some kind of problem. And that was something they just had to live with as long as they lived. And so I called and I rescheduled my appointment with the surgeon. I put it off a week, and I continued to just talk with other guys that had had proton therapy. I got some leads, and I talked with guys, and they were all very willing to share their story. And the more I learned about proton therapy, the more convinced I was that that's what I wanted to do. And so I called and canceled the appointment with the surgeon, and started making plans to have proton therapy.
So, and then a number of things happened. You were going to go to a place there on the East Coast,
Right.
and apparently they wouldn't accept your insurance, and they gave you quite a large figure that you're going to have to come up with cash up front.
Right.
So eventually you found out about Loma Linda.
Yes.
And what did you find out?
Well, it was recommended to me that I just call around. I called Loma Linda, talked with them, talked with the business office, explained my situation about the insurance problems, and they gave me a price that was much less than it was on the East Coast. And so I scheduled an appointment, sent all of my clinical things that they needed to make a determination if I qualified for the treatment. And long story short, I wound up out here in November.
So you completed your treatment. Time for you to go back home. And tell us about the experience while you've been here. Have you been sick while you've been here?
I actually have done extremely well. My stamina has been good. Very, very little problems with having to trot back and forth to the bathroom. Some guys do, but I've been really fortunate. Very little urgency. I've just absolutely gotten along super well.
So what have you been doing now? You know, the journey brought you here. What's been happening while you've been here? What have you been doing while you've been here, Rebecca?
We go to the meetings, the potluck.
You
and
got the Tuesday
and the
night
support.
potluck, Wednesday night educational support group, the Thursday night restaurant tour, and if I remember, you've been on all of those. And he's been kind of functioning like a mayor at the Tuesday night potluck, and been actively involved in providing music. In fact, you provided music for us at our Christmas dinner here at the medical center and Christmas dinner at home. So, I mean, how's it been going?
Well, we've done a little sightseeing. We did a little on the way out, and things like the Grand Canyon and the Petrified Forest, Painted Desert.
This is all the time while you've been sick.
While we were out here, Hoover Dam, we went to see Hoover Dam,
Right.
rode through Las Vegas. We took a trip up to Sequoia National Forest to look at the giant trees, and we just made a 2-day trip out of that. We rode up, went through the national park, and then spent the night up that way, and then drove back, and then we've been over to Los Angeles and Hollywood, and
This is all the time while you've
Yeah,
been sick
yeah,
and being undergoing treatments.
Right, yeah.
You had 45 treatments.
Yeah.
So you've been out here for about 10 weeks. So have you been sick at all?
no, not
You
really.
haven't been sick.
No.
How have you been doing this whole time?
Doing fine.
Been doing fine. So you've had cancer, and I've asked the question, you know, now that you have cancer, what difference does it make to you? Tell me, now that he's had cancer, what difference does it make to you and your family?
Well, you realize that you're not going to be here forever, and you
There's
realize
kind of a
the mortality.
time frame on that.
Yeah, it makes you stop and think and consider what's really important in life, and it's basically people. It's your friends and your family. That's what's really.
How long have you
important.
been married?
42 years.
42 years. Okay, you're right. Friends and family. So what have you learned out of this experience?
Take each day as it comes and enjoy it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if I remember, you know, the idea of taking responsibility
Right.
for
Yeah.
your own health.
That was one thing I got out of Bob's book, and that's probably the greatest thing I got out of it. A lot of good information, but it was take charge of your own treatment. Don't let someone talk you into doing something that you really don't want to do or something that you may regret.
So if you're, you know, there's people looking on right now, and this week they've just learned, you know, some kind of a diagnosis or some information coming their way. What would you tell them?
In the case of prostate cancer, some people react too quickly. They don't educate themselves, and they don't find out what their options are, and even worse, they don't find out what the potential side effects can be down the road. And I think they just react too quickly. There may be times when you have to act quickly, but prostate cancer is generally slow growing. And if you find out that
Better
yours,
repeat that again.
I said, prostate cancer is generally slow growing. There are some exceptions, but if you find out that you have the type that's slow growing, you have some time to make that decision. So just don't jump into it and do something that you're going to regret later. Talk to guys that have done exactly that, and they regret what they did, but once you do it, I had a friend who used to make this statement, once you ring a bell, you can't unring it.
You can't unring it once you've moved ahead and made that decision. That's right. And an important point is everybody has to make their own decision.
That's right.
I mean, you know, you look at all the facts and you can share the information and they read and they talk to people, but it's their decision.
Right.
And they're living with that decision.
Yeah, I said in the beginning, there's no way I can leave my office for practically 3 months. I said, I can't do that. And our daughter is our partner in the business, and she's taken a lot of responsibility as far as running the business over the last few years, which was our plan. And but she looked at me and she told me one day, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you can do. You can do that if you want to do. So it's having support, somebody to step in
It's a
right.
critical point. And,
Yeah.
and the family and your friends, and those are the people that are really, that's the most important thing, is friends and family and relationship. Well, the second question I ask, you know, I often ask 2 questions of our patients, and now that you've finished up, now that you've had cancer, now that you've been treated, what difference are you going to make? Have you thought about that question?
Yeah, I've thought about it, and in fact, I'm already kind of planning on talking to some civic clubs and for sure all the guys that I know, and advising them about getting their PSA checked, because early diagnosis is the best diagnosis. And so yeah, I'm already thinking about it. I want to let people know about proton therapy because unfortunately most of the guys that I talked with that did some alternative, they never knew about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, never heard of it. And yeah.
So you're going to be proactive in this,
Yeah.
this whole matter. Well, I know that you're going to be able to share your journey, and I know that as you're continuing your travel and your 50 years of gospel music, and you're going to have opportunities to share.
Absolutely.
You're going to find people coming out of the woodwork that are going to say, you know, I was just diagnosed, and it may not be prostate cancer. As you know, we're treating over 100 different
right.
tumor sites. We've got some very, very exciting things that are going on here. Breast cancer, early detection, a lumpectomy followed up with 10 treatments. Early stage lung cancer. We've got a clinical trial going on for prostate cancer, and there's some great research that's going on. So there's some really exciting things in the future for proton therapy. I'm so glad that you're able to join us here on Journey of Hope, and we got people from around the world that are watching. And for those that are in our listening audience, I'm Lynn Martell with Journey of Hope, and our guests here, Bobby and Rebecca, have shared their journey, a journey not unlike many other people. But they learned about coming here to Loma Linda, and they experienced healing and hope and wholeness. And they're leaving here with an optimism and willingness to share. For those of you that are looking on, even this week, you may have received some sobering news. I want to tell you that God's got a plan for your life. If you'll open your hands and your heart to Him, He'll guide and direct and lead you. Until next week, God bless you each one. Give Him a chance with your life. See you next week.